Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. So we are officially starting now the parallel session 2 of the closing summit of our Healthy Workplaces campaign. This session, which is dedicated to worker participation for a safe and healthy work in the digital age. Before we start the session, I have a couple of organizational points. The first one, you will be happy to know that the session finishes at 5 and not 5:30, as is indicated in here. So, but there is another session, interactive session, when we finish this one. The second one, we also have some online participants following this session who can also ask questions in the chat. And when we speak, it's very important to use the microphone so that they can follow and so that the interpreters can also do their work properly. So we have in this room French interpretation, and obviously we also have English. So in this session, we will explore a topic that is at the very heart of occupational safety and health, of OSH and prevention. It is worker participation, which is really essential in the digital age to prevent worker safety and health, as we will hear from our speakers. So you'll probably know that in the last years, EU-OSHA has conducted quite some research on the impacts of digitalization on OSH, both in terms of opportunities and challenges to OSH associated with digitalization. As you heard from our director, we had 5 priority areas. So digital platform work, the use of AI to manage workers and algorithms, smart advanced automation and robotics, remote and hybrid work, and smart digital tools for OSH. Even if we had defined these 5 priority areas, let's say, there were a number of issues that were transversal to all these 5 priority areas. And worker participation, of course, was one of these very important transversal themes. So worker participation, as we know, it's a requirement under the EU-OSHA Framework Directive, but it's a really cornerstone to prevention. Yet, digitalization, as we've seen in our research, can bring obstacles to worker participation. But in our research, we have also seen how we can overcome these obstacles to foster proper worker participation for the good of workplace safety and health. And that's what our 4 speakers here this afternoon will share with us, the results of their research, case studies, policy initiatives, practical experiences, and even good practice that has been awarded under our campaign to show how these obstacles may be overcome to improve OSH in workplaces. So without taking more time, let's start now. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. And I will give the floor to our first speaker. So Oscar Molina, who is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, in English, Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, and also director of the Institute for Labor Studies. Oscar's main research focuses on industrial relations and collective bargaining, on AI, on the impact of AI on employment and employment relations. So this afternoon, you will present the results of some research that you actually carried out for the agency, commissioned by the agency, on the obstacles of AI-based worker management on OSH and the importance of worker participation. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present. Is it okay for translation if I speak like this? Okay, just to make sure that everything. So thank you for the invitation and to be able to present this research that was actually commissioned in the context of this campaign. And the idea, as the title already kind of provides, the basic essence of the report, is to understand what's the connection between worker participation using the old term of industrial democracy to kind of understand to what extent industrial democracy can be a mechanism helping companies to use responsibly digital tools to apply artificial intelligence and forms of algorithmic management at work. So that's basically what we did in this report together with some colleagues. Here you have the names. I'm not going to mention all of them. Maria, well, Juan, Pablo, and David Moral. So the report basically started with this question. We know that algorithmic artificial intelligence-based worker management tools matter for workplace health and safety and for working conditions. And these mechanisms serve to collect real-time data for workers and then use that data for making decisions at work. We know, and this is something that we are also sharing here in this session, this is becoming increasingly widespread across sectors. In all the European Union, we understand this as a form of platformization of work. And so, it's not only the traditional platforms, but now many companies are using these tools. But this has an ambivalent impact. So on the one hand, we know that artificial intelligence, and this is something that was discussed this morning also in the opening session, can have negative effects on psychosocial risk on workers, but at the same time, and again, here there will be a nice example of how companies can use worker participation to, make sure that these tools are used in order to reduce these risks. So that's the thing that we want to understand, to what extent forms of worker involvement can help to kind of move this impact towards the kind of the positive one. So the contingent effect of technology, right? That's basically what we did in this report. At the end of the day, technology is not deterministic in its impact. It's contingent upon the institutional and organizational context where it's applied. And I think EU-OSHA, during these 3 years, has shown very well that this is the case, that it's important to have strong institutions in order to make sure that that impact is always positive. So, very rapidly, which were the main research questions that we tried to address in this report? First of all, identify psychosocial risks linked to the use of these artificial intelligence based worker management practices. It's hard to pronounce it, everything. Secondly, to analyze the obstacles for worker representation. We know that these tools can reduce the capacity of worker representation to negotiate, to mediate workers with organizations. And the third question, to examine regulatory and participatory responses, basically through cases where worker participation has kind of mediated the use of these tools. So the methodology that we use, we combine extensive academic and grey literature review, and then we look for case studies to show best practice cases to show how this was happening. So what is this term of artificial intelligence-based worker management? It's basically systems that gather data, often in real time, but not necessarily, on the workspace where workers carry out their task, the work they do, and the digital tools that they use in their work. This is then fit into AI-based models that make automated decisions using this data. So that's, I think, is a very nice definition that covers what really we are discussing here, which is, there are systems that gather data, and this data is used to make automated or semi-automated decisions that depends on workers. So this is used for several functions in the company, from task allocation, scheduling, performance evaluation, safety monitoring, productivity optimization. It's not here, but we can think about selection. It's not part really of work organization, but it's also one aspect that is very often used artificial intelligence. So We know that these type of systems can increase risk. I'm not going to enter in the detail of this. I mean, EU-OSHA has done a lot of work these 3 years to show that this is the case. Loss of control, work intensity, unfair performance evaluation just based on data without taking into consideration the context where the work has been carried out, dehumanization, etc. But at the same time, we know that these mechanisms can help to improve, for instance, task allocation, scheduling, right? Detect psychosocial risk, and this is something that the cases, the companies that have been awarded show very nicely how this can happen, and reduce physical burdens on companies. Again, the final impact will depend on the institutional and organizational context where this technology is applied. So in this report, we thought about kind of direct and indirect effects whereby these artificial intelligence-based technologies could affect psychosocial risks. The direct effects are those that we just discussed. I mean, the introduction of this technology has a direct impact, for instance, on intensification of work, right? But at the same time, there are some indirect effects to the extent that these technologies make it less easier for worker representation to negotiate, to mediate, and to negotiate on workers' conditions and well-being. These technologies may also have an indirect effect. So there are these two effects that combine. So that's something that we wanted to highlight in this report, that is not just the direct effect of the technology, but also the erosion of the institutional capacities of worker representations structures that may also lead to poorer working conditions and increase in psychosocial risks. So the old term of industrial democracy that we recover here in order to understand when we talk about workers' involvement, we are talking at the end of the day giving voice to workers. This is one of the oldest, if not the older, term used in industrial relations. And we mean by industrial democracy to all means and institutions that workers' representatives may use to have a say in an employer's decision-making process, and more generally in the governance of employment relations. So it covers everything. It's a very general term that goes from pure information and consultation rights to negotiation to even co-determination. So everything is included under this kind of umbrella term of industrial democracy. But the important thing here is that at the end of the day, any form of worker representation and involvement is a counterbalance for the company when it has to apply any technology. So if that technology is applied, taking into consideration what workers have to say, that will always deliver better outcomes from the point of view of the well-being of workers. So industrial democracy, and that was the starting point in the report, we think industrial democracy is key in order to make sure that the use of these artificial intelligence-based worker management practices are shaped in a positive way for workers. So again, I'm not going to enter into the psychosocial risks that are associated with the use of these artificial intelligence-based techniques, because we know all of them: stress, distrust, anxiety, burnout, inequity. So, and they combine. We know that these systems are generating new risk, that was mentioned also in the opening session, so that add to some of the old risks, more physical, if you want, the workplace. But at the same time, there are opportunities of the use of these tools for risk prevention. They can help to a better design of jobs and tasks of workers, to prevent burnout, for instance, by better scheduling the work at the workplace, to better balance the workload of workers to make sure that workers get better balance in their functions, and the real-time health monitoring. We saw, that was mentioned this morning also, these kind of mechanisms to control the temperature of workers that may help to really help those workers to prevent problems. So yes, that can be a positive effect, but then again, that clashes with information. Sometimes the use of these wearables and techniques can create some problems in terms of privacy and the use of information. Are we sure that the information collected through these wearables is only used for this, and that is when the workers' involvement plays a role to make sure that this data is only used for this purpose. So yes, there are these risks. Again, workers' involvement may use to reduce this risk of misuse of data. So just to make sure, I'm going to check my time. 5 minutes. I think I'm going to do okay. So which are the main obstacles for worker participation derived from the use of these artificial intelligence-based worker management practices? So we kind of detected 4 that derive from the use of these technologies. The first one is invisibility, which is related to awareness, to what extent workers are aware, workers and their representatives, that these technologies are being used. These technologies are often very invisible, you don't really know, and they may hide behind the other type of uses of the technology. So it's hard to know if they are being used. Secondly, opacity. We know that related to the black box of algorithms. We don't know how that works, with which purpose the data is used. So the limited access and the black box of algorithms is an additional problem for workers to mediate the use of these technologies. Complexity. Workers require some technical skills in order to be able to negotiate, to understand how the technology is being used. And finally, power asymmetry, because at the end of the day, if those technologies are used in small and medium-sized companies, and this is something that also some of the awards that tomorrow will be presented were, and that's very nice to see, in small and medium-sized enterprises where often there are weak or no worker representation structures, so that can also be even more problematic than in large companies. So these are the 4 obstacles for worker participation that the use of AI-based technologies pose. So they combine, obviously, they are all there, and overcoming these obstacles is not easy, and it requires institutional support, probably regulatory changes. So, and that is what we also kind of put in this report. We thought about, okay, in which ways can we institutionally support worker participation structures to really be able to mediate the use of these technologies? And we thought about these 2 kind of mechanisms. The first one are the so-called protective standards, which are more focused on providing individual rights to workers, like the right to information, to be able to get access to data. And this is used, we know that, but in the report what we claim is that it's even more important to strengthen what we call participatory rights. That is, rights that are collective, that give more capacity to worker representation structures to be able to mediate the relationship between workers and the company when it comes to the use of these technologies. And this is, for instance, one of the cases that I'm going to show very briefly now, the change, the reform of the co-determination law in Germany. It's a very nice example of this type of participatory rights, strengthening an existing institution, kind of making it capable of negotiating in a new context where these technologies are used. So Going rapidly to some of the cases that we explored in the report that were kind of presented as best practices. The first one was a Swedish mining company that used artificial intelligence-based tools in order to make sure that all the workers were at all times traceable in the mines, which is, in terms of safety and health, is key for mining workers. Of course, this poses important problems in terms of information and privacy, because at the end of the day, you are tracing every time where workers are in the mine. And what the worker representation structures in that company did is negotiate to make sure that there was a strong anonymization procedure for that, for the implementation of that technology, to make sure that no one could be really identified. So all the workers were traceable, but without knowing who was behind that kind of number. So yes, strong unions in that mining company, together with co-determination rights, because the introduction of technology was negotiated, allow for a safe implementation of this AI-based technology in this company. We have another case of a Danish manufacturing company that use also AI-based technologies, including smartwatches, tablets, and cobots. And that, you know, the interesting thing about this case was that the whole design and implementation of these technologies was negotiated, and there was a strong involvement of the Works Council in rolling out and in making sure that, you know, we introduce it, we see which are the problems, we correct them, and then there is constant feedback between the Works Council and the company on how the technology is introduced, and that delivered a number of positive outcomes for workers. Yes, then there is the riders company in Spain, the use of, in a delivery platform, a cooperative of using the same technologies, other traditional delivery platforms, but in a very different way. Again, the contingent idea. The same technology, but with a more kind of, how to say, humanized management that deliver very different impacts for workers. I mentioned it already. Another of the cases that we explored, everything is in the report, is the adaptation of the German co-determination law that included, among other things, the right to expert assistance for members of the Works Council to make sure that they have the technical capacities to negotiate on this type of technology. So that, you know, which is one of the main problems that worker representations have. Again, it was mentioned this morning, Spain's algorithmic transparency rules, right, that were kind of included in the Riders Law, 21 Riders Law. It is still developing. Again, this is important because at the end of the day, it's a changing technology, and the laws have also need to change, and this is also being expanded. So just another example of making sure that there is access to the use of these technologies. Just to conclude, so the main conclusions of the report: there are ambivalent effects of these technologies. They can prevent or create risk, but we know that psychosocial risks are more likely when there is weaker workers' voice, when there is more industrial democracy. There are always better outcomes for workers, where there is lack of transparency. When there is strong surveillance and performance pressure, this also is detrimental in order to make sure that there are positive effects. And what we conclude is, yes, at the end of the day, worker participation in any of its forms, industrial democracy in general, is a decisive factor shaping outcomes when these technologies are implemented. And I leave it here. Sorry for exceeding my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Very interesting and very comprehensive presentation. If you have questions, please keep them in mind, and I will take all questions at the end of the sessions to all speakers. Now let me introduce you to Armanda Cetrullo. So Armanda is an assistant professor in economics at Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna in Pisa, hope I said well, in Italy. And her research focuses, among others, on the relation between technological change, labor, and work organization. So Armanda will present more case studies on AI worker management from the automotive sector and comparative analysis.
Yes.
In conclusion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers, Maurizio and Emmanuel, for having me today. It's an honor to be here. And also thanks Oscar, because he said a lot of things, so maybe I can be faster in my initial presentation. Today I'm presenting this report written with Anna Rosa Pesole. That's also the contribution of some Belgian colleagues from Leuven University, where essentially we try to understand more in details what was already said before, that is the relation between the implementation of digital technology and AI work management system and OSH, taking into account the work organization domain in a broader perspective. As also Oscar was saying before, in order to really assess and appreciate the implication of these technologies, it's important to abandon a deterministic perspective and account for the possibility of heterogeneities across companies. And indeed, in our study, we focused on 2 companies, one located in Belgium and one located in Italy, with the idea of developing a comparative field study analysis. The criteria that we adopted to identify these companies with the help of EU-OSHA experts were 3. First of all, belonging to the automotive sector, because the automotive sector has a strong history of OSH practices and also because it is characterized by a wide adoption of these technologies. Then, of course, we needed that the 2 companies were implementing these technologies at a very advanced stage, and also we needed the willingness of the company to let us go inside the plants. This is a very important point. In order to do this type of research, you really need to be able to visit plants, to visit workplaces. The main data are 30 semi-structured interviews conducted with workers, managers, experts, together with a visit to the plant and the collection of additional material. Before entering into the detail of our findings, let us consider briefly the characteristics of the 2 companies. They have both similarities and differences. The Belgian company is an OEM producing cars. In the plant you have a paint shop, a welding and final assembly shop, all the departments needed for the production of cars. It's a very large company with 7,000 workers, with a production of 200,000 cars. On the other hand, the Italian company is a supplier, a tier 1 supplier, much smaller, with 49 employees, but with a very high production volume of 6.8 million rings. The production is a production of synchronizer rings that are used for car engines. In terms of work organization practice, both companies have adopted the lean model, but in a different way. In the Belgian one, we found a more standard approach to lean work organization model, whereas in the Italian one, we see a really advanced lean approach. In terms of union and industrial democracy, there are also important differences. The Belgian company has a trade union body, but a very low degree of participation of workers. On the other hand, in the Italian company, we do not have a formal trade union, but 2 workers were appointed as representative of the workforce, and the degree of participation is extremely high. So, as I said at the beginning, we really try to combine these 3 domains that many times are understood and studied in a separate perspective. So trying to really put in dialogue the technological dimension with the OSH dimension and the work organization one. First of all, with respect to technology, what we can say with respect to AI worker-based management system that were previously presented by Oscar. One point that emerged in both companies is really the necessity of looking at AI management system as a complex architecture made of many different technological tools. So usually the attention is focused on algorithm management, but in order to develop and make this architecture works, you need many other technologies. You need digital sensor and tools. You need automated machineries that now start to be digitally connected and can send signals about their efficiency and the performance. You need production software system. An example is the MES, manufacturing execution system. And you need also to develop user interfaces that need to be easy to use, especially if you want workers to be connected and be integrated in this worker management system. All of these tools contribute to the development of worker management system. That can be done, it's important to stress, both can determine both an automated or semi-automated allocation of tasks, but can also be done following fixed algorithm rules or learning model fostered and fed by AI. What we found was more the first type of model, so fixed algorithm rules, whereas the really implementation of AI learning model for a worker management system is still under trial because of the complexity. Another converging trend that we found in both companies was really the goal of use of this type of technologies that also go very well in line with what was presented before. Essentially, these tools are used to allocate tasks, monitoring the process and worker performance, but also they really play an important role with respect to quality and safety controls. These models of management can allow to send alerts in case of excessive proximity to given machineries, can control the temperature of machineries for quality issues, and can remind workers to have specific ergonomic positions in case of health ergonomic risk. So there is really a variety of usages, but of course they also have a very big implementation in the maintenance and logistic department. In maintenance department, the adoption of these technologies allow to develop what is called the predictive and preventive maintenance, which is increasingly important for companies. And also in terms of logistic management, these worker management tools allow to really create a virtual warehouse where all the information about all the position of raw materials is available. So if these are the common trends, there are also important differences between the two companies when we look at the OSH domain. First of all, with respect to the ergonomic risks, let me say something about the general position of the two companies. The Italian company is a virtuous case of a company that has developed a very strong and virtuous risk assessment process in the previous years, such that all the ergonomic risks are well below the minimum threshold. And in this context, the adoption of these technologies seems to have fostered and further improved the well-being of workers from an ergonomic point of view. Let me give two examples. The case of logistics. Thanks to the availability of the virtual warehouse, the logistic workers are able to to reduce the number of physical movements that are needed in order to pick, deliver the material, because a lot of information is already organized in the system. In the case of maintenance workers, we found a similar result in the sense that the amount of physical movement and really physical movements needed in order to go to a specific workplace and intervene is reduced thanks to the empowered connection and interaction through the technology. In the case of the Belgian company, the evidence is completely different. In this case, let's say that the company is characterized by a very strong tension between the productivity goals of a mass production system and OSH prevention. This tension is not solved, and in this case, the adoption of AI technologies, worker management technologies, actually goes in the direction of fostering this tension. Why? Because this technology allows to make the process more efficient, increases the pressure on work intensity and pace of work with a potential negative effect on the ergonomic risks. With respect to the cognitive dimension, we focused in particular on the autonomy, let's say, perception of workers, not because we really wanted to focus on this, but because this is really something that emerged from the interview. In the case of the Italian company, we see that the adoption of these technologies has determined an increased sense of autonomy across different hierarchical roles, different hierarchical job positions. In logistics, as I was telling you before, the presence of the virtual warehouse gives to the workers a sense of higher efficiency that also improves the quality of their work. In the maintenance department, workers have the possibility of rely and look at historical data on breakdown, and this makes them more self-confident about their decision-making process. Middle managers also report this sense of empowered professionalism due to the fact that the technology is combined with the lean practices and really allow to increase the standardization of the production process, so reduce the unexpected event and reduce the uncertainty. On the contrary, in the Belgian company, we do not find evidence of this enlargement of the autonomy of workers because the time frame, the work pace is extremely strict and deviations are not allowed, neither for operators nor for more specialized workers. The only case where there is evidence of an increase in the autonomy is for team leaders that are the ones that also have let's say, the tablets and the digital tools that in some cases can exploit this use of the digital technology also to make decisions in more autonomous way. But this is not a generalized result. Yes, 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. So in general, with respect to the autonomy, the cognitive stress, and the psychological domain, what we can say is that in the case of the Italian company, it seems that there is a virtuous, let's say, example of implementation of this technology, and the impacts are observed along the entire hierarchical structure. For managers, as I said, because the standardization of the process allow them to deal in a better way with unexpected events. In the case of operators, what we found is also a sense of relief due to the possibility of relying on the technology to validate their own tasks. Workers reported a sense of lighter workload due to the fact that the technology tells them that all the tasks have been performed and all the quality checks have been validated. But this, of course, also arises a potential problem, a potential issue, because the worker that is relying too much on this technology may also experience a degradation of cognitive skills related to the memory, to his prompt reflection, and so on. In the case of the Belgian company, as I said before, we see different results according to the hierarchical structure. It is important to say that in Belgian case, we could only talk with assembly line operators, so the perspective is more limited to that specific part, but let's say we see how the hierarchy also plays a different role. Team leaders are probably the only one that can benefit for some improvement, even if the general context is characterized by increasing work pace and also increasing pressure. When the technology is not functioning properly, it is perceived as an external constraint that is actually making the work worse and not easier. So to conclude, what emerged from these two case studies is that the implications of the adoption of these technologies on OSHA and work organization in general are not univocal. They are really strongly related to the socio-technical characteristic of the organization, and of course when we say socio-technical characteristic of the organization, we also mean, let's say, the power relation within the company. Of course, this case is interesting and also problematic because the participatory model characterized the company without the union, whereas the other company does not record any participatory mechanism. So this also may be food for talk and discussion. In general, we see mainly two possible paths for this technology. On the one hand, this work-based management system using AI can really foster greater worker autonomy and also enhance job satisfaction when the workers keep the control of their task. when the workers keep the control of their tasks, enlarge the autonomy, and eventually also develop new skills and also increase their task profile, task portfolio. On the other hand, these tools can also lead to higher intensification and fragmentation of tasks, inducing workers to make a choice between keeping the speed and keeping the work pace that is required, and also preserve and prevent any OSH risk. To really conclude, we could say that there is the possibility of controlling and also managing this transition to digital workplace, but this needs to go hand in hand with a very strong worker participation and the creation of systems that are transparent and allow for, let's say, the involvement of all the actors in the decision-making process and also in the implementation process, where really all the triggers and the challenges arise. So thank you. Here there are all the details of the studies and the authors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent. So now our next speaker, Alessio Bertolini, is a postdoctoral researcher at Fair Work, which is based at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford. Within Fair Work, he coordinated research on in-location-based digital platform work, and one of his key interests are the impact of digitalization and technological change on working conditions and labor standards. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel, and thanks a lot also to Maurizio for inviting me to speak at this conference, also to EU-OSHA for organizing, I think, a very topical conference at these times and in this era, actually. So basically, my presentation is going to be based on a report and a series of policy briefs that I've done for the EU-OSHA, collaborating with Maurizio and Emmanuel. And of course, I'm going to try to focus specifically on the worker participation aspect in relation to occupational health and safety. I would like to start by explaining a little bit what platform work is, and I'm sure you all know what platform work is. It's any kind of work that is really mediated by a digital labor platform. However, what I want to highlight here is actually when most people think about platform work, they think about the Uber driver or the food delivery rider, you know, being it Deliveroo, Just Eat, or Glovo. However, that's only a tiny part of platform work. You know, nowadays there are therapists that offer their services online. There are lawyers, there are nurses, there are designers, there are data annotators, there are carers, there are babysitters. You know, like so we live in an economy that is becoming increasingly platformized, and really, you know, food delivery and ride-hailing or transport is really the tip of the iceberg, the most visible aspect of platform work. So I just wanted to start with this digression, just to be clear. So what are the main occupational health and safety challenges in relation to platform work? Well, you can see here there are many. I won't go into much detail. You can read the slides. But I want to focus specifically on one here, which is employment classification. You know, the vast majority is calculated in the EU. Around 90% of the people employed in platform work are actually self-employed. You know, they're working as autonomous workers. As such, they are not covered by the majority of legislation and regulation when it comes to occupational health and safety. Okay? The vast majority of them are genuinely self-employed, but there's also a substantial minority which is considered to be misclassified or self-employed but bogusly self-employed. So they're just being misclassified by the companies as such. And here you can see a few more challenges. I only have 15 minutes, so I won't focus on all of them, but I'll just bring here to your attention which are, I think, the most relevant for worker participation. One of them is algorithmic management. Already the other previous two presenters have partly focused on this. And of course, in the platform economy, there's really an important lack of transparency and accountability in the way these algorithms work, in the way they monitor, in the way they control, and in the way they evaluate work. I think Oscar William was talking about the black box. So the algorithms are really under proprietary rules by this company. It's very difficult to understand how they work, how they reach the outcomes that they reach. And this, of course, becomes very difficult for worker representatives and for the workers themselves to really understand what's going on. Why are they assigned a certain task? Why are they being paid a certain amount? Why they are refused a certain job? Why they get punished by the company for having done apparently nothing. And of course, when all these decisions are taken, there is a lack of due process. You know, so workers cannot generally appeal this decision. They cannot even ask for an explanation about why a certain decision has been made. And another relevant aspect is collective representation. As you probably can imagine, being a platform worker is a very isolated form of work. If you think about a data annotator or a cleaner, they might work for a platform without never ever meeting any of their co-workers working for the same platform. And of course, this makes collective representation a very strong and peculiar issue for platform workers. You know, it's probably not not just a coincidence that when you think about platform workers, the vast majority of people think about delivery workers and transport workers. And the reason, of course, partly because they are the most visible out there, but also because they are one of the few that actually could meet on the street. They could meet with other workers, so they've been able to collectively organize and collectively represent and lobbying for their rights and lobbying for their interests, whereas the vast majority of other platform workers have not been able to do so. And of course, again, also in relation to the employment classification, in many countries there is legislation which is limiting the possibility of collective representation for self-employed workers. This, of course, creates a further institutional barriers to collective representation. So what are the regulatory developments? Well, when it comes to employment classification, well, Spain here was a front runner. Spain was the first country to introduce a presumption of employment for delivery workers, and other countries have followed suit, like Malta, Belgium, Croatia, and Portugal, just a few examples. And the EU directive on improving working conditions on platform work that was approved last year also contains a presumption of employment. In its original version done by the European Commission, it had listed a series of criteria such as the control or the ability for of the platform to set a maximum pay or other criteria that were meant to cover all platform workers in the EU. However, in the final version, the provision was taken out and has been in some way diluted. So now it's really dependent on the individual member states to decide what are the criteria that trigger this presumption of employment. Other countries have instead introduced or already had in use a third employment category. I here bring the UK, which is the countries where I'm residing. It's not in the EU anymore, but it still follows many of the EU rules. And as you might know from the news, there was a Supreme Court ruling in the UK. That was the first Supreme Court ruling that actually said that Uber drivers were not to be classified as self-employed, but they belong to so-called LIMBY worker status, which is an intermediate employment category that gives these workers many of the employment rights, including in relation to health and safety for Uber drivers. In other countries, instead, classification specific to sectors, for example, in the transport sector in Germany and Spain, workers have to be employed in order to be able to operate and to drive their cars. That doesn't mean that these workers are employed by Uber or Cabify or any of the other platforms. They are generally subcontracted, so they're generally subcontracted to fleets of operators, but they have employment rights, so they are employed by these subcontractors. We'll skip this just for the sake of time, and I'm going to concentrate to the other two things that are most relevant for worker participation. So algorithmic management and surveillance. I think both me and the other previous presenters have talked about these challenges, and the EU directive contains one specific chapter to regulate algorithmic management. In a sense, is considered one of the really most important pieces of legislation, one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation in the world that regulates algorithmic management. And specifically, it establishes certain rules when it comes to transparency of the way the algorithms need to be transparent and accountable to the workers and the worker representative. They need to be able to be explained, so decisions that are taken by the algorithms need to be, the worker cannot, or a worker representative can ask the decision to be explained. And of course, they're also subjected to human oversight and monitoring. So a decision cannot just be taken, for example, if a worker gets deactivated, which is the digital platform way of saying you get fired by the platform, or any other disciplinary decision now has to be seen and monitored by a human representative. 5 minutes, yes. And also there are some countries that have also implemented some regulations when it comes to algorithmic management, such as Spain or Italy. However, because they're trying to be very encompassing but also very general, that also means they have not been able to address the issue in an effective way, basically. When it comes to collective representation, I was talking earlier about the fact that some countries don't allow workers to, self-employed workers to collectively bargain. And one of the main barriers to this is the fact that they appeal to competition law. So if you're self-employed and you basically are collectively bargaining, you're basically creating a cartel. That's the idea. However, a EU Commission's guideline published in 2022 that were not specifically addressed to platform workers, but they also mentioned platform workers specifically in the guidelines, removed these limitations. So they said that workers that are in a dependent and in a weaker bargaining position, they are able to bargain, and the EU competition law shouldn't come in the way to this collective bargaining. But I wanted to focus here, because it was the focus of some of the policy briefs that I produced for EU-OSHA, is other forms of regulation. So the International Labour Organization is discussing currently an international conventional platform work, but also civil society organizations are also pushing for the improvement of working conditions. One of them is Fair Work, which is the project which I've been working on for the past 6 years almost, and the other ones are platform cooperatives. So I'll touch upon each of them side by side. So first of all, the Fair Work project is an actual research project based at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford and the Berlin Social Science Center, and it aims to evaluate and score platforms, digital labor platforms, based on the working conditions that they provide to workers. And it does so in a very simple way. So Fair Work has elaborated, together with social partners, 5 basic principles of fair work, which are fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and fair representation. And for each of these principles, there is a basic threshold if some basic labor standards are met, and a more advanced threshold in case more elaborate, more sophisticated thresholds are met. So the arithmetic is quite simple. There are 5 principles, 2 points per each principle. Each platform can get from 0 to 10. And we do these studies in many different countries. Here you can see some examples from different continents. And here we really classify, we produce league tables for platforms to understand where they sit when it comes to labor standards and working conditions. And here, which I think is the most relevant for worker participation, is our summary results from the over 700 platforms that we have evaluated over the past 7 years. So first of all, you see that in the vast majority of cases, the vast majority of platforms don't meet even the basic threshold for each of these principles. And I think even more relevant when it comes to fair representation, so the collective representation of workers, we're talking about less than 10% of the platforms meet even the basic threshold, and less of 5% of the platform meet the more advanced threshold. That means that more than 95% of the workers basically don't have any basic form of collective representation. And the other category of, in a sense, self-regulations is the cooperative platform economy. So when we talk about the platform economy, we generally talk about the corporate platform economy, the kind of Silicon Valley, sort of like Uber type of platform. But there's also other kinds, smaller in scale, more cooperative platforms that also operate in our market. And these platforms are based on very different principles from the one of the corporate world, and many of these principles have at their core the interest for worker participation. They have democratic member control, they have member economic participation, and they have education, training, and information. So in a sense, cooperative platforms, and one of them we've seen, I think Oscar was mentioning before about CopCycle, they really are kind of holding to the true meaning of sharing economy, which was another initial term that was used for platform economy. So why are these cooperative platforms more relevant? Well, there is, of course, attention to working conditions and to labor standards is really embedded, as I was saying earlier, in its cooperative model. And the fact that worker representation and ownership is really key, is part of their principles, part of their values, it really contrasts it to the kind of more venture capital, growth at all costs, growth before profit strategy that is more typical of the more corporate platforms. And in that sense, these platforms can really bring occupational health and safety at the forefront. They can have occupational health and safety as one of the main, the key aspects that they want to improve in their operation. But there's also important limitation. I'm closing here. So why, when we talk about platform economy, we rarely hear about the cooperative platform economy? Well, one of the issues is funding. Like because these platforms don't look for profit as their main aim, they have issues with funding. An issue with funding means there's also an issue with growth. A lot of these platforms remain generally quite local. They remain quite tiny because they want to allow workers to keep their democratic control and their democratic ownership. Of course, access to technology and expertise can also be a problem. And of course, here, the example of CoopCycle is a good example how some of these co-ops have been able to overcome the limited access to technology and expertise. And finally, also sustainability, because they don't have endless funding from venture capitals. They're generally funded by NGOs or civil society organizations. They find it more difficult to sustain themselves in the long run. And finally, sometimes they find themselves to cut corners. So although they present themselves as a more cooperative aspect in order to survive in a cutthroat, competitive environment, sometimes they don't live up to their own principles. So I'll just close here. I think I was already over time. But thank you very much.
On time. Thank you very much. So now with our last speaker, we're moving to a manufacturing industry of a very interesting type of products. So we're going to the Irish distillers with Michael McHenry, whom you will see again tomorrow on stage in the plenary because he and his colleague have won a Good Practice Award for the case that he's going to present to you. And one aspect that we particularly appreciated in this case, good practice example, was the good cooperation between the management and the workers. So thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to EU-OSHA for inviting us to present our project. B1 Robotics, I suppose, is just an unloading system to reduce musculoskeletal injuries. Just quickly, in Irish distillers, we kind of put safety to the forefront of everything we do. So we open every meeting, every presentation with a safety moment. And 2 points I'll pick up from this is we always put safety first and we always look out for each other. It's two of the points that kind of follow through in the project. Just a little bit about Irish distillers. In the 1900s to the 1960, there was a big decline in Irish whiskey, and this was down to a number of wars and also to prohibition in the US. So that drove three of the largest companies that were left in Irish whiskey, Jameson, Powers, and Cork Distilleries, to amalgamate in 1966 into one distillery. And then from that point on, all those three companies' Irish whiskey was produced in Midleton and Cork. In 1988, Pernod Ricard bought over Irish distillers, and we became part of Pernod Ricard. And so today, this year, we're celebrating 200 years of manufacturing Irish whiskey in Midleton. So who we are, we're producers of some of the most iconic Irish whiskies in the world, predominantly Jameson, Redbreast, and Midleton, very rare to name but a few. B1 Robotics, we call it B1 because majority of our barrels come from America. And so we handle about 200,000 barrels annually. And I don't know for those that are not aware, all of our whiskies matured in oak barrels. It has to be there for 3 years up to 30 years. So we handle barrels quite a bit. They're all about 200 litres. So some of the health and safety challenges we faced handling these barrels, They're delivered in 40-foot containers. There's 206 barrels in every container. They're stacked 3 high, and each barrel weighs 60 kilos. And during transport, these barrels can shift around in the containers. And historically, we would have had 2 guys manually handling these barrels out of the containers. And we can handle about 1,000 of those containers per annum. So some of the measures we had, say, pre-project were rotation of our operators, additional PP using different types of gloves and bump hats and whatnot. We put a layer of plywood down on the top of the barrel so that the guys wouldn't fall down through the barrels. And we increased task-specific manual handling, so specifically how to handle barrels safely. So just a quick video of showing how we used to do it in the past. So you guys in a container handling barrels. In the summertime it could get quite hot, and obviously in winter it could get quite cold. So conditions probably weren't idyllic either. Imagine it wasn't the most sought after job in the distillery. So what we did in 2017, we put a team together to start to explore options about how to move the manual side and go into an automated side. So we put a team together that was taken from the workers, from operations, health and safety team, engineering, automation. And we got the buy-in from an integrator called Pills, who worked with us on this. So the primary objective was to automate that process we just saw, and the team worked together trying to look at different ways. So some of the things we did look at were semi-automated forklifts, and also forklifts with barrel handle with attachments, but these weren't thought to be the most the best way forward. Other things we looked at is reducing the layers to 1, but then that would increase our carbon footprint by 3. And that's another big focus of our distillers is trying to become carbon neutral. Outsourcing to our third party was another option we looked at, but then we discounted that because then we're transferring the risk to another company, and that's not what we're about also. So some of the other challenges we had for automation is when you get someone in America to load barrels, they're never loaded in the same pattern. Each of the casks, they're all handmade, so they're all slightly different. And we wanted to maintain an operation of about 600 to 800 barrels unloaded per shift. So they were kind of some of the challenges, and also we wanted to maintain stacking the barrels coming into us 3 high. So they were the challenges. So what we put together then was we got an AMR, an automated mobile robot, that had a robotic 6-axis arm attached to it. And then we kind of got that in to work with a vision system which had a partial AI in it that would kind of select the barrels for best optimal unloading. And so the robot has 6-axis, and then on top of that we made sure everything was CE marked, and we met all the machinery safety directives. So the system components, if we start from the start, we put in a trailer restraint system so that any trailer is parked for unloading, they'd lock in place, and then that was interlocked to the door, couldn't open until that was done, and the dock lever couldn't operate until that one. So that made it safe that any of the guys opening the doors or getting the load prepped, trailer couldn't be removed without them closing the door, making it safe. The AGV was an OmniMove AGV, so that could move left, right, in and out, and could spin around. So each of the wheels were specially designed that they could rotate individually. The vision system, which kind of takes pictures of every load, would pick the best barrel to pick, and then we'll see it there in a minute. Then there was a conveying system with the telescopic boom, so the boom conveyor would follow the robot and AGV into the container as it was unloading. And again, we made sure that we kept safety and throughout the process. As we were going through this process, the guys who used to unload those containers at start were part of the team. So when we were doing our risk analysis, our design reviews, our HAZOPs, they were able to point out some of the things we might have missed in the initial design. Even things as simple as opening the door safely, how we do that, how there was restraint bars, how we get those down safely. So all those things had to be thought out, and it took a while to get all those things resolved, and couldn't have been done without the participation of the guys who would have been unloading those containers knew what to look out for. So the vision system, the picture on the right is what the system would have taken. So the green highlighted barrel was the next one selected. The picture on the left is the robot actually picking that next barrel. And the idea was to keep learning and learning as we went. So this is a short video of it in operation. That's a quick show how it works. So on top of that, then some of the safety features we added to this. We put light curtains that would divide the bay into three different sections. So the robotic system could operate safely, and the operators could be working on the other side, opening the doors and preparing the loads. If for any reason they broke that light curtain, it goes into e-stop, and then in conjunction with the trap key system, they'd have to go back and reset it safely. So there was no risk of interaction with the robot while it was actually working. For some reason they could break the light curtain, there's still a 2D scanner on the robot and AGV that would detect any movement. Obviously there was e-stops throughout the system. The trailer restraint system was on it. Safety gates and trap key interlock system for any operator involvement. And this is just what the light curtains kind of depicted. So the boom conveyor, as you can see there, on the AGVs in Bay 1, that can move transverse crossways to bays 2 and 3 also. Enhanced safety gates, so that was just meeting the machine directive, and all gates that are opened can be interlocked, and we use a one lock, one life system for anyone who wants to go inside. Full body entry has to lock out each gate as they enter. So we've enhanced safety with the trailer restraint. Again, you'd see as a locking pin locks into the trailer wheels so that the trailer can't be removed while there's guys working inside the trailer. Yep. And so the success, what was measured on, was significant reduction in any instance. Container capacity was unchanged. We were able to deal with the size and different shapes of the casks, minimal operator intervention, and probably the key one for us was the same guys that were unloading those containers were operating it now. So their skills moved from manual handling to running robotics. And again, they were very happy that it was met all our safety requirements, CE marking and machine directory. And as Emmanuel pointed out, we were delighted that we were able to win an award for it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. So this leaves us 5 minutes for questions. Does any of you in the room have any question to one of our, well, to all of our speakers?
My question is especially to the first and the third speaker. I was wondering whether in your research you took account of particularly vulnerable workers like migrant workers or young workers, for example. I can think of in bicycle delivery, for example, or gender issues. So the worker participation from a gender point of view, of the inclusion of issues around female workplaces, for example, whether in the choice of whether it's included in legislation or in company policy specifically, or also in practical administration. Also in the choice of the examples that you looked at, for example. You mentioned, the third speaker mentioned healthcare, for example.
Are there any more questions? Yeah, okay, yeah. So we take these 3 questions and then you answer. Yeah.
I got 2 questions for Irish distillers, if possible. I'm curious about the involvement of workers in the process of the new system, the realizing and introduction of the new system. And I would like to know whether the workers have been shifted to different tasks after the introduction of the system, replacing the manual unloading system. Thank you.
Okay. There was one more question over there, I think. Yeah.
Hello, Juliana Delika from the Austrian Trade Union. I would like to ask questions to 2 colleagues, if it's possible. The one is to Oscar Molina-Romo. How did you, on slide 12, you said that the outcomes are trust-based governance to prevent misuse, and I was wondering how trust-based governance looks like. And the other question was to Michael McEnery. How many people less were employed due to the digitalization? And you said that there is a reduction of risk. How was this specified?
Okay, so there were some questions to several of you. Who will start answering? Oscar?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Regarding the first one about vulnerable workers and the gender issues, the short answer will be no, really, because, I mean, yeah. Okay, I think we are safe now, right? Okay, good. And the reason is basically because this report was aimed to provide kind of a very general picture about the role of this industrial democracy to address the use of this technology. So we didn't really pay attention to whether this was used in work environments where there was a predominance of vulnerable workers, or, I mean, I think it was in the case of platforms, I think that can be covered, nor gender issues, even though some of the companies, I mean, most of the companies or cases that we analyzed were kind of predominantly male based, mining, manufacturing. But then there are the cooperatives that has had a stronger share of women, but no, not really, because it was kind of, let's say, it was more kind of providing the grounds for understanding what was the role of the industrial democracy. And regarding the second one, shortly, trust-based governance systems, right? Trust is a very tricky concept. We use it a lot in industrial relations, often without really knowing what's behind. In this case, trust is built over time and after repeated interactions. So basically, trust is the result. It's not something that is out there, but it was built after a history of negotiations and involvement that, whereby workers have the assurance that management will always consult and negotiate anything. So, it is the result. Trust-based governance systems are not created by any law, but is the result of a history of interaction. That was the case in here. That's the short answer.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just to complement on the first question, we didn't present it here, but we have commissioned some specific research exploring the gender dimension, in particular, for instance, in digital platform work, but also in the healthcare sector where algorithmic management systems are used as well. And the dimension of migrant workers as well is covered in a range of projects. Maurizio? And telework and hybrid work as well, of course. So it was taken into account in our research. Now maybe, Michael, if you want to answer the questions on your own.
Yeah, I suppose the number of workers are still the same. We didn't have any reduction in people. I suppose now, instead of their involvement is HMIs and SCADA systems running those, so there was a lot of training involved in that. That's their current status. And their involvement throughout the project was they're at every single design meeting from the concept right through to commissioning. And even to this day, where they're still working with our in-house automation team to continuous improvement on that system. It's up and running just over about 2 years, but we're still trying to improve it and make it better and better. And that's with the involvement of the operators running it today. For the other question, risk, I suppose we've measured our risk by carrying out risk assessment both on the old system and the new system, and we use a 5x5 matrix to measure risk. And the risk rating would be a lot lower in the new system for all activities. Also, I suppose when we're operating the manual system, we would have had incidents throughout the past years, whereas we've had no incidents of any description since we installed it 2 years ago. So I suppose that's how we're measuring it. Thank you.
Armanda, Alessio, would you like to add something? Some of the questions?
Even if it was not, really it was very interesting also to see the concrete case. Maybe with respect to the trust, the question from the trade unionists, I think what, for instance, in our case emerges is that really the technology space is a space on which bargaining is possible only if also workers have the, let's say, the possibility of entering into the bargaining context, but also if they have the knowledge. It's very important from a unionist perspective, I think, to really have the knowledge of the technology entering into the black box of innovation. So, maybe, as I was saying, the issue of the trust is also an issue of competence, not only power relation, but also knowledge that need to be acquired, and it's not an easy task. That's why maybe EU-OSHA has a very important role to play also.
Yeah, I think most of the questions were not really closely related, but I think I can answer something about the vulnerable workers. So like in the EU specifically, the vast majority of platform workers are migrant workers. And there is a calculation that between 50 to 70% of food delivery workers in the EU are actually irregular migrants, so workers who technically cannot work in the country, So and these workers are even more vulnerable than the let's say, standard mainstream platform workers, because, you know, they are subjected to double exploitation, you know, from the platforms themselves, but also from the people owning the accounts that they use in order to work. And of course, I mean, all work is gendered, but platform work is even more gendered than most other work out there. You know, I think in the food delivery sector and transport sector, more than 90% of the workers are men. And in the kind of cleaning sector or domestic work sector, I don't have the percentage, but the vast majority of people are women. So, of course, the issue of gender and the intersectionality of the kind of different social categories plays an important role in regulation. And I think, especially for occupational health and safety, the fact that a lot of these people are technically irregular migrants, so like they are not subjected to labor law, right? Because they technically are not supposed to be working in the country. Of course, causes further need for regulation and for support for these people.
Thank you very much. We are 6 minutes over time, so we need to close the session now. If you have more questions, please feel free to come to us. We are here still, and tonight at the networking event, or to write to the agency, and we will try to address your points. And let me remind you that please don't take your headphones outside of the venue, otherwise Brenda, our moderator, will be very angry at you. Thank you very much for your attention and for your participation.